This is the Haulin Assets Podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Haulin Assets Podcast, episode number 153. I am your host. Over there, he is Chris.
Howdy, Craig.
Oh, yeah, I should say my name. I'm Craig. He's Chris.
I said it. Yeah. There you go.
Thanks, buddy. You got my back. I'm Craig. He's Chris. And today we are talking about independent owner-operators versus leased owner-operators. It's this is a big distinction, and it's a big decision to make when you are thinking about jumping into the pool with the rest of the owner-operators. So we're going to dive into some of that stuff. Before we do, I'll just remind everybody to go to haulinassetsllc.com to check out the full show notes, to get past episodes. For those of you who might be new to the podcast, and I imagine there will be quite a few with this particular topic, make sure you go to Haulin Assets LLC and check out past episodes on the financials. We do it every other episode. So once a month, we'll talk about the financials of the company, how it's doing, go over the profit and loss statement, and all of the documentation for that is there. So it's an awesome resource for podcast listeners. And then when you actually decide to make that leap and become an owner-operator or build a fleet or whatever it is that your goals happen to be, then make sure you go to motorcarrierhq.com. So motorcarrierhq.com. It's got all the tools, all the people, all the tips you need to help get you started. Plus the merch for this podcast, lest we forget. Nice t-shirt, by the way, Chris.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So, Chris, how are things going?
Good. Other than I hate like this cycle that we're in right now.
Which one?
The election year.
Oh, sure.
It's an election year, and so you've got one half of the people that think the world's going to be doomed if one president gets elected,
sure.
And the other half thinking the world's going to be doomed if the other president gets elected. And then, so what all that does is it just creates, an economy in a world that's kind of stagnant because everybody, everybody thinks there's a chance that
right,
the whole world's going to go to hell in a handbasket.
I'm not going to pull the trigger on starting my own company because, if the other guy gets in, then there's no point. The world's going to end, and we're all going to be eating, tins of tuna forever.
Yeah, and so it kind of bugs me because I'm the kind of person that I feel like I control my own destiny to a great extent, and I that's true. I don't care who you are. Some people aren't going to believe that, and if you don't believe that, then you probably shouldn't own a business, right? Honestly, you really probably shouldn't.
I was going to bring up this idea later on in the podcast, but maybe I still will. Okay,
do.
But no, I like this idea that you bring up. It's kind of spheres of control, right? Instead of wringing your hands and worrying about what you can't control, think about what you can, and dig into that, right?
Right. And the president can obviously affect things that happen in our lives, but you as a individual are going to have a greater impact on your own life than any president ever will. And so take that control away from the president, and whatever it is that you want to do, you just jump in and do it. Don't wait. Don't think that what the president does is going to determine the outcome of your life, because it's just not.
Well, to pull back and kind of generalize this a little bit, it's similar to what you said very early on, in the first 10 episodes of the podcast when you mentioned there's no perfect time. It's up economy, down economy, maybe there are problems in your life, or maybe your life is going incredibly smoothly or whatever. There's no perfect time to start a business. The perfect time was yesterday, basically. Yeah. Just go do it, and if you have the mindset, then you'll power through whatever comes.
For sure.
Except, I know there's going to be people, Chris, who are saying, now who's being naive? You think the president doesn't? I look forward to the comments.
Everybody can have their own opinion.
I look forward to the comments on Facebook. Find Haulin Assets on Facebook. I'm sure that it will
Tell us how you really feel.
Wonderful and civil discussion, as Facebook always is. All right, Chris. So what are we talking about today? leased owner operators versus independent owner operators.
Yeah, we're going to, let's see the best way to put this. Being an independent owner operator versus being a leased owner operator is really kind of a controversial topic in some ways. And I really think that's because for some people, being an independent owner operator is the right thing to do, while for other people, being a leased owner operator is the right thing to do. And so what we're going to try to do in this episode of Haulin Assets, the podcast, is really dive into the pros and cons of both. We're going to talk a little bit about what you should watch out for and some things that you should consider as you try to make the right decision for you.
So as we get into this subject, do you mind if I ask you, Chris, cards on the table, do you have a general preference? Or do you say, hey, it's totally down to the individual and their style and what they want to do? Or do you say, hey, this is probably the better way to start out?
That's a great question. And really for me personally, independent owner operator is the way to go. Okay. But that doesn't mean it's the right answer for everybody. I really think some people, leased owner operator is going to be the right thing. For others, independent owner operator. I'm one of those people that I feel like I can control my own destiny. And I think there's more financial upside with being an independent owner operator. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the pros and cons, but that's for me the right answer, but it's not necessarily the right answer for everybody.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the other things that we talk about when we're giving advice. We may say something that sounds very concrete, but you have to keep in mind, oftentimes what we're saying is 90% of the time, for 90% of people, this is the choice that we would recommend, but not necessarily for you. Actually, Chris, that's another great place to plug motorcarrierhq.com. Go get somebody on the horn, talk it through, see what's right for you.
Our business coaches can help you with that and kind of your specific circumstances and situation and help you make that decision.
Yeah. So in order to make the decision, we have to know what decision we're making. So let's define our terms here. Let's talk about what is an independent owner operator versus a leased one.
So an independent owner operator is just like the name says, you're independent. You have your own motor carrier authority, your own MC number, your own DOT number. You've also got a truck that you either own or you lease, and you're operating completely on your own authority. Nobody else is dictating anything that you do.
Okay.
Whereas with a leased owner operator, in this situation, you also either own or lease a truck, but then you're operating under the authority of another motor carrier. So what does that mean is that other motor carrier typically helps with a lot of things. For instance, they typically find all your loads. They handle some of the administrative tasks. They provide liability insurance because you're operating under their motor carrier authority. They're kind of in charge of safety, all that stuff, and they have to provide you liability insurance. But as a leased owner operator, you're also going to have to get your own insurance, a different kind of policy. It's often referred to as bobtail insurance. And this really covers situations when you're not operating for the other company, like you're between loads and doing something personal, or you've finished a load and you're driving home, that kind of thing.
Okay, all right. So the term leasing here, I feel a little bit confused about leasing, because it sounds like, and I know we're going to get into pros and cons, but the way you just described it, it kind of sounds like you're driving for somebody else, but taking on the risk of owning your own truck. Congratulations. And I know it's more complicated than that, but it sounds a little like that.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. And we're also, another way that leasing gets kind of really confusing in the trucking industry is you talk about a leased owner operator where you're, operating under somebody else's motor carrier authority, but you also hear about leasing trucks, and oftentimes both of those things are happening at the same time. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the difference. So when you lease a truck, and this is just leasing a truck, you're essentially renting a truck, right? And typically a long-term rental or lease, you don't actually own it. a bank or a leasing institution typically owns the truck. You're just leasing it for a fixed fee from them. And oftentimes why this really starts to get confusing is because when you lease to another motor carrier, some people will lease a truck from the motor carrier they're leased to. Does that make sense?
Okay, wait. Say that sentence again.
So the person that is leasing under a motor carrier, they come to that motor carrier, they want to be a leased owner operator, but they don't have their own truck. And so the motor carrier says, that's fine. I'll lease you a truck. And so they'll have like a separate agreement where they lease a truck to the individual that's leasing onto them.
So how is that not an employee relationship?
So a lot of places won't allow you to you can't legally do that. It still happens.
Under the table or something?
Under the table / you don't get in trouble till you get caught, right? And so
Sure.
a lot of the times they just won't do it. Like in Utah, the law is that you have to have, like, to really technically be a leased owner operator, you have to have your own truck. You can't drive somebody else's truck, like 1099. So when you're leasing to somebody, you're becoming an independent contractor for them.
Okay.
So, just like when a general contractor builds a house for somebody, they're going to hire a plumber that does all the plumbing.
Right.
A trucking company that leases
Drivers.
essentially the driver and truck.
Right.
That driver and truck is an independent contractor for that motor carrier.
Okay.
And so you've got that lease. And then, like I said, where it gets really messy, and this is one of the things you kind of have to be careful of and watch out for, is if that motor carrier also leases you a truck, that just increases the risk that things are going to go bad.
Sure.
Because they kind of have you captured, right?
Right. It's a double jeopardy kind of situation, over a barrel.
And we'll talk a little bit about that when we kind of get into some of the things to watch out for and the pros and cons of being a leased owner operator.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start then with independent owner operators. And I got to say, as you were just describing or trying to explain all of that to me, I thought one of the pros of independent owner operator status is, boy, that sure sounds a lot simpler on paper.
On paper, it really, in some ways it is. In some ways, the risk is diminished because you're in complete control. You've truly got that independence. That, for me, that's one of the pros. Like, I am independent. I get to the financial rewards. I'm making money just for me. I'm not making money for somebody else.
Right.
And so you're in control. You can do what you want. You can operate how you want. You can run how you want. When you're leased onto somebody else, you don't have all that same level of independence and freedom.
Okay. All right. So what are the other pros? Let's do pros and cons then for independent operators. Let's run through a list then. What are the good things about it?
You get to decide what type of loads you haul, when you haul them, where you haul them, how you haul them. You get to determine all that stuff.
Right.
You've got more control when you start, your own trucking company. It's an investment, and you've got that control over that investment. And that's one of the things that I like about owning businesses versus owning stocks. It's like I can buy stock in GE, but I have no control over what happens with GE.
It's not like you're sitting on the board.
I'm not sitting on the board of GE.
Wait.
I mean, I should be, but I'm not.
Of course. We all should be, obviously. Okay, so you control your own destiny, which, I think psychologically is going to put some people off. So Chris, I'm going to reveal just how big a dork I am. I play esports sometimes. Okay, you familiar?
No.
Like internet sports. In esports, there are some games that you play alone and some games that you play as a team. And certain people gravitate toward one type of game or another. And the people who play solo games, they tend to look down their noses at the team game players because they're like, yeah, you just want somebody else to blame, right? Anyway, no, it's just made me think of that with this. An independent owner operator has no one to blame but themselves if they fail. But on the other hand, if you succeed, that's a lot of kudos that you can give yourself.
Yep.
Right.
And that's kind of, that's another one of the pros, I feel like, for me anyway, of being an independent owner operator, is just that extra level of pride of ownership. you own it, you are the company. It's your own thing. You own the equipment. It's a really cool feeling.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, but on the con side of the ledger, it's not all sunshine and roses and farting unicorns and all that. So what's
if we look at this numerically, there's way more cons than there are pros. So take that into consideration.
Okay, numerically
speaking, but I still think the pros in most situations outweigh the cons. It's just there's some more of the cons.
Okay.
You have to find your own loads, and so that puts some pressure on you. It's and especially before you get used to it, it's a hard part.
Yeah.
And it's probably, if not the hardest, it's definitely probably about the most important thing you do in your trucking company is you got to find good loads.
Right. Says the guy who's finding loads for 11 trucks right now. Yeah. That's you're still doing that on your own right now?
I'm actually starting to transition out and having Nate's kind of taken over more of that role. So which is a good thing, but that kind of brings me to another, I'm going to make a plug for Haulin Assets Academy. I just right before I drove here to record this episode, I started watching our first videos. We got the videos back edited, and they're looking good. So we're really close to launching.
Nice. Okay. So, and the point there being Haulin Assets Academy, you're going to learn about finding loads and all that other stuff. Okay. Yep. All right. So what are the other cons that we want to go over?
So just all the responsibility falls on you. Right. You get all the credit, you get all the blame, but everything falls on you. So you either are doing the bookkeeping or you're hiring somebody to do it. You've got to do all the sales. You're coordinating the maintenance, the admin tasks. So you're filing your if to return or you're hiring somebody to do it. And you've got a lot of these things that you have to do. And one of the nice things is you can, like I was saying, you can hire somebody to do it. So Motor Carrier HQ, tracking assets. We do a lot of this kind of stuff for our clients so that they don't have to worry about it. But you still have to do it or you have to pay for it.
Right, exactly. It's going to cost you in either time or money. Take your pick.
But I think, one of the cons of leased owner operators is you're giving a portion of that revenue to the company you're leased to.
Right.
And I feel like if you do independent owner operator correctly, those extra expenses that I was talking about are still better than paying the revenue that you're giving to somebody else. So with all that stuff going on, I just feel like the stress is higher.
Sure.
You've got more going on, higher stress.
Which is going to play to some people's strengths. I think some people really shine under stress, right? As a creative, I kind of get that with the idea of deadlines. Some people wither under a deadline. Other people really thrive with a deadline. And so it's, again, just a personality thing. So you label that as a con. I'm going to put that under the neutral category, the higher stress, because I think that is for some.
And I would say if you're the kind of person that higher stress, those deadlines push you to do better, then independent owner operators likely the right thing to do.
Right.
If you're the kind of person where the stress just kind of is debilitating to you and it makes you shut down, then you probably shouldn't be an independent owner operator.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, what about startup costs? This was a big theme of our early episodes. How much money does it take to start one of these trucking companies? And I imagine because you're operating under somebody else's authority and because they're finding loads and all that stuff, and insurance costs are going to be lower. Does that mean it's cheaper to lease and more expensive to be independent?
It is, yeah. So the costs definitely are higher as an independent owner operator.
Okay.
More startup costs, there's just more things you've got to do, so it's going to cost more money.
Right. And what about insurance then? I mentioned that, but take me through kind of the insurance implications for an independent.
So I'm going to generalize this. And so it's not always 100% true, but typically if you lease onto another motor carrier, that motor carrier is a larger fleet. They've been operating for a while. They've developed a history. And if they're a good fleet, their insurance costs are probably lower, which the insurance, they actually provide it, but typically, you're paying for it one way or another.
Yeah.
And so your cost is going to be a little bit less, especially that first year or two of being an independent owner operator. Your insurance, your brand new company, your insurance is usually going to be a little higher.
Okay. All right. Anything else on the cons list that you want to go over?
You can feel isolated at times. Again, the buck stops with you. You can feel like the world rests on your shoulders. That's one of those things that contributes to that stress. And then another thing, I've started multiple businesses, and every time you start one, I feel like I get a little bit better every time. But there's always, there's things that you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? You've got your unknowns are unknown. You think you know everything, but you don't. And so it's those hidden unknowns that can sometimes get you into trouble. And it's a little bit more risk. You've got to be aware that there's going to be things that you don't know about that are going to throw you for a loop.
Yeah. It's, so Chris, I've been in this house now for 7 years, and I feel like I'm just now starting to get a handle on home ownership. And that's what that's reminding me of. I went from renting to owning a home, and boy, it turns out that landlord took care of a lot of stuff, know, and now it's all on my shoulders. And you got to cut yourself a little slack. Know that it's going to take some time to learn all those things.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between home ownership and independent owner operator, and leasing and renting.
Okay. So before we move on to the pros and cons of leasing, it sounds like you are of a personality type that makes those cons that you mentioned less weighty than the pros. You're willing to take on the stress. I don't know about the isolation side of things, but I know there are a lot of folks who love the idea of, I'm going to get to spend how many hours a week by myself, listening to my audiobooks or, fiddling with my CB hobby. Sorry, I'm showing my age there with truckers. But these are going to be pros for a lot of people, depending on your personality, right?
Yeah, your personality will definitely affect that.
So, all right. Well, then let's talk about leasing and pros and cons there, and then maybe we can talk about who that might be right for. Okay, so leased owner operators.
So a lot of the cons under independent are pros for leased, and vice versa. So some of these you've already heard a little bit. So pros with being a leased owner operator, some of the administrative tasks are handled for you. Like they're typically taking care of the, handling and finding insurance. They're taking care of the fuel tax reporting and everything that you have to do there. They are providing you loads. I mean, that's one of the biggest pros of leasing onto somebody else, is they should be able to provide you consistent work. If they can't, they shouldn't be leasing owner operators.
Right.
And there are lots of lease companies, motor carriers that lease owner operators that aren't great at finding loads, and you should avoid those guys, because that's the really a biggest part of the purpose of leasing is consistent freight that pays decent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What else? What other pro columns?
You'll get some cost savings when you typically hire onto or lease to a fleet, because they should be a little bit bigger, so their insurance costs should be lower. Sometimes they'll have a fuel card that's better than what you can get, that will get you better pricing in fuel. But then again, that's another one of those things you kind of have to be careful of, because they may have a fuel card that gets them better pricing, but they may not pass that savings on to you. They may be taking it for themselves. So there's less financial risk in a lot of ways. You're not putting out quite as many expenses, and so the loss that you could eventually receive if things aren't successful isn't going to be as high when you're leased onto somebody else versus when you're independent. They provide you training and safety programs, or at least they should.
Sure.
If they're a good company, they will.
Yeah.
And here's another one of the, what I feel is another really good reason of why you might want to consider leasing, even if it isn't forever. It's a great way to gain experience. So you can use it like a stepping stone, right? Say your eventual goal is to be an independent owner operator. You can kind of take a step towards that by leasing onto somebody else, getting your own truck, learning about the expenses of the truck and how, things that you have to handle with the truck, like being a renter in real estate. You learn some of that, but when you go and buy your own home, you learn more. And so instead of just, you're taking baby steps, right?
Ooh, analogy time. It's the tandem jump. of business ownership.
Right, there you go. Yeah.
There you go.
Let's go skydiving.
I'm good. You Army guys can handle that. That's fine.
Kind of like that.
Have you done it?
Well, I airborne qualified in the Army.
Oh,
I haven't done the civilian type, but static line jumps, yeah, I do those all. I've jumped 3 or 4 times, 5, 6 times a year.
do you really?
I do.
Oh wait, I've known you for 5
You
years,
I'm surprised
and I
you didn't know that.
Maybe we've talked about that before. I have a crap old man memory. So
Yeah, no, I jump on a pretty regular basis.
that's
Next
pretty
one's
cool.
coming up in June.
Is it? Where are you going to jump?
This one, most like 80% of the time I jump, it's just west of Utah Lake.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, after that little tangent, let's talk about the cons of leased owner operators. What do you got for me?
So I think the biggest one is just you're sharing profits with somebody else. You know, every lease.
That just, you know what, as the guy who does spreadsheets and counts cents, not just dollars, that's gotta just kill you.
That's the thing I don't really like about leased owner operator is you're obviously it's a profitable situation for them, right?
Or they wouldn't do it.
Or they wouldn't do it. And so they are keeping some of that profit for themselves that could be going to you.
So, okay, we're going to get to some more cons, but can I pause on that one for a moment and say, on the independent side, that's what you and I have concentrated on for 5 years. On the independent side, it can be a struggle for that first year or two to finally turn the profit and start making money and start saving money and building up those accounts. Is that even possible as a leased owner operator? Does it all just depend on who you get leased onto? Like
It depends on who you get leased onto.
Yeah.
Like there's really good lease relationships that work well, and you can save money. You can, make money and do really well. There are other situations where they kind of bleed you dry and you don't. That's kind of another one of the cons of being a leased owner operator is you're still working for somebody else. You still kind of have to follow their rules. They're making money off of you. And if they're a predatory company, which there are plenty of them out there that do that, it can actually put you in a worse situation.
Wow, that's a cheerful thought. Okay, well, let's move on to some other cons then. What else you got for me?
I've got 2 more that I kind of want to talk about. One is some contracts could be really restrictive, and so you have to fit into their mold and do things the way that they want you to do, which sometimes that doesn't work for you. It can kind of create a win-lose situation, right? It's a win for them but a lose for you. And so make sure if you're thinking about leasing onto somebody else, you read through the contract and you understand it well. The other one, and this is, in my opinion, another big reason, one of the bigger cons of being a leased owner operator, is there are issues when it comes to transfer of ownership. So if you say you grow you can actually grow a fleet under
a lease.
Under a lease. So you could end up having 5 or 10 trucks that you're running under somebody else's authority. But then when you try to go and sell that business that you've built, you're kind of under the mercy of the company that you leased to. And sometimes that can get to be a very messy situation to the point where there's really not any value in your business outside of your equipment.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So those are the pros and cons then. We stated up front kind of where you fall yourself, but we've even talked to, I think, was Bubba Blackwell leased owner operator?
Yep, he was.
And he was doing well his first year.
And I've talked to him as recently in the last, well, when I say talk to him, email or
sure.
I haven't picked up the phone and talked to him, but he's still doing well.
Okay.
And he's leased on and
so
loves it.
Yeah, I guess I just
he's
bring
got
that
a good
up.
relationship. He's found a good company to lease to.
There you go. Yeah, I bring it up because when we finish on the cons of the one that you don't usually recommend, it can sound like we're trying to scare people off from that. And really, I think what I hear you saying is it can be right for a certain person. Maybe it's your personality type or your situation, whatever. It can absolutely be the right decision. Just keep an eye out. make sure that you're actually getting yourself into a decently lucrative position and not one where you're going to be bled dry, as you say.
And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute or two.
Okay. So yeah, what else, what other things do we need to think about with this whole issue?
So some other things to consider, a couple with independent owner operators. One, right now, fraud is rampant in the trucking industry.
Really?
Yeah. Double brokering of loads and brokers that, people that set up to make it look like they're a broker, or they look like they are a shell company, aren't a real company, and will get you to haul a load they get paid for.
And then take the money and run.
Take the money and run. There's just a lot of that going out there. And there's things that you can do to mitigate that. That's, one of the pros of working with a factoring company early on is they have systems where you can, check on that, a company that you're going to haul a load for, and they'll be able to give you a much higher level of security that it's a good, legitimate company because they vet them too. So you just got to be really careful of fraud.
Okay. As an independent. Yeah. What else? As an independent, it takes more money to start it. Does it take more money to maintain it? I would imagine.
Yeah. And it's one of those, like you definitely need to have a little bit better of a reserve as an independent owner operator than you would need to have as a leased owner operator.
Right. Okay. Excellent. And then on the leased side, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually have quite a few.
Oh, okay.
And here's where you just have to be careful with, because there's a lot of snakes in the grass out there when it comes to leased owner operators. I would, they're kind of predators that will take advantage of you. One of the tall tale signs is if they are also going to lease you a truck. So you're leasing onto them. You don't have a truck. You come to them. And sometimes you'll see this happen with, somebody that wants to be a leased owner operator. My buddy did this with this company and I'm going to go buy a truck from them and lease under them. And I'll just make the truck payments to them. There's just so many more ways that can blow up and become really ugly. And in my experience, watching those situations, I've just seen too many bad things happen. So we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about avoiding that or what you need to, what my recommendation is there. The next thing you kind of need to be careful of is California has passed a law. It's called AB5. It's the AB5 law. Ooh. It basically makes it impossible to be a leased owner operator in California.
Right. I ran into this as a contractor, as a contract employee for a company, because I'm independent myself, but I'll find contract employment every once in a while, and yeah, in California they have certain rules and restrictions about how you can, how and when you can require certain scheduling or how payment has to be made and all this stuff that, as you say, I'm applying it elsewhere, but in trucking must be tough. So
the way that they've actually written some specific language into the law for trucking, and you basically can't be a leased owner operator in California.
Really?
You either have to be independent or an employee. You cannot be leased. It's weird, because even what the rule is you can't. I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but basically, you can't. The company that you're an independent contractor for can't provide the same kind of service that you're providing. So in trucking, if you're a motor carrier that's a trucking company and you're an independent or you're a leased owner operator leasing to them, you're doing the same thing, right? You're a truck motor carrier. You're both motor carriers.
Okay.
You can't do that.
So general contractors are going to be okay, but
a general contractor hiring a plumber,
right?
You're okay.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Excellent. So anything you suggest people do as they're trying to make this decision, which way to go?
So one of the things I also want to talk about is if you're thinking about being a leased owner operator, make sure you talk to some other people that are also leased owner operators from that company.
Okay.
And talk to several of them. Don't talk to just one. If you've got a buddy, somebody that you actually know, that's a good first step. But I've even seen lots of problems where, my friend told me to lease to these guys and he said they were the best, but they're terrible. So talk to several, do a lot of due diligence, make sure you read through the entire lease agreement. And I would even recommend, I know it's kind of expensive. It'll cost you probably several $100s, but have an attorney read through the lease agreement. It could potentially save you from a lot of heartache.
Right. And on the attorney side of thing, I'll give my own plug there. Yes, they are often worth it, but make sure you find a specialist, somebody who specializes in employment law or contract law, something like that. If your buddy next door is a patent attorney, might not be the right person to read your contract. Just saying, find somebody who is reasonably well specialized in what you're trying to do.
For sure. So at Haulin Assets and at Motor Carrier HQ, I usually recommend you do not lease a truck from the motor carrier you lease to.
You said earlier that it's often illegal. Is that blanket? That's not every state, or it's a blanket?
That's not illegal.
What? So what? Say it again then.
So do not lease the truck. Like if you don't have a truck and you want to be a leased owner operator, you have to either purchase a truck
or lease
a truck.
Oh.
And so oftentimes what will happen is the motor carrier will say, "Oh, you don't have a truck. I'll lease one to you."
Right.
And so they take a truck out of their fleet, essentially lease it to you or sell it to you, and then you use that truck. But oftentimes you're not getting the best truck in their fleet, and then at that point they really have you kind of by whatever you want to call it, by the neck. Like you are really at this point beholden to them because you can't leave.
Right.
Because if you leave, that oftentimes violates the term of the lease and you have to turn the truck back into them. And you've probably upside down in the truck and it can cause lots and lots of problems. So
now you got to pay to leave.
You got to pay to leave. It can leave you in financial ruin. Like, I just don't recommend you do that. So if you are going to be a leased owner operator, buy or lease your truck somewhere else. And then the other way that they oftentimes kind of trap you is they do your vehicle registration for you. Vehicle registration costs typically, $1,000 to $3,000 a year. And so, they will buy that for you and do the registration. But then when you try to leave, they take the registration, like the registration stays with them. It doesn't stay with your truck. And so you may have paid $3,000 for the registration, and 6 months into it, you decide these guys just aren't working for me. They're not getting the miles that I need. They're not paying me what, the rates that I need to be able to function. And so you leave. Well, you're out essentially 6 months worth of registration because that registration is owned and tied to them, not to your truck.
Right. So by being willing to spend a little more upfront in either case, or well, I guess here specifically we're talking about leasing, it might cost you a little bit more to go buy your own truck somewhere else. It'll cost you a little bit more to take care of the registration yourself. But you're spending money to lower your risk of a terrible, terrible situation.
That's a good,
kind of like the lawyer.
It gives you a little more independence, right? It gives you freedom to kind of do what you want. Like, because if you've purchased your own truck somewhere else and you've gotten your vehicle registration, your IRP yourself for your own truck, 6 months into it, if you're having a bad experience with that company, it's easy to leave. There's nothing tying you down there. You can just say, "Hey, I'm done with you. I found somebody else. I'm going somewhere else." It's almost that easy. Whereas if you're leasing your truck from them or you just have your registration with them, it's just harder to leave.
Yeah. So at a certain point, the incentives line up to just say, you know what, maybe you should just be an employee driver somewhere. You can make a living. You'll be, safer. There's less risk involved, et cetera, et cetera. At a certain point, that lease situation becomes even more risky than going independent.
It does. Like I would say, there's two ways to do. There's one way to do leased owner operator, and that's buy your own truck or lease it from a leasing company, not from them, and get your own IRP. If you can't do that, be an employee driver until you can.
Okay. Wow. All right. We're ending on a strong note. That was a very distinct period there, Chris. All right. Any other thoughts before we call this one quits?
I'd like to hear people's experience, because like I said, like there's there are varying opinions on both sides of the argument, and in my opinion, there's reasons to do both. And so I'd love to hear people go onto our social media accounts, into Instagram or into Facebook,
where you can complain both about the president and your lease agreement.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, tell us what's been good or bad about either situation in your case. I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, yeah. So if you just search Haulin Assets, if you put a G on there, then me from 4 or 5 years ago will come and haunt you. Don't put a G on there. Haulin Assets. You can find us on Facebook. Find us on, where else did you say?
Facebook,
everywhere.
Instagram, TikTok. Yeah, we've got a
Are we on TikTok?
We are.
Chris?
Yeah. Just as of
how
3 or 4
young
months
are
ago.
we? We're youngins.
You're younger than me.
Well, not in spirit. All right. So yeah, find us on all the socials. You'll get a little more than your bi-weekly dose of Haulin Assets that way, and you can interact with other listeners. I imagine the discussion for this episode will be spirited, let's say.
Hopefully.
So yeah, keep it civil, but we really do want to hear your opinions. Don't hold back with your opinions. Just hold back about being rude about them, and we'd love to see you there.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, see you, Chris.
Thanks, Craig.